Okay, Brad Keselowski, Command Performance here in the Media Center at Kentucky Speedway. Brad drives the number 2, Miller Lite Ford for Team Penske. And Brad, I know you were in here yesterday, but you've been out on the track. You've covered some laps on this new repave here at Kentucky Speedway. Certainly, I'm sure you saw the truck race last night. And just what's your thoughts about maybe some of the nuances here of the track and how you think it's going to play out for the rest of the weekend?
Yeah, well, it's, not much has changed since I was here yesterday, but I would say that, I've been on track with the Cup cars and with the new aero package and all those things, and it's been a bit of a joy to drive. The cars are, challenging to drive like we thought they would be and like we hoped they would be. And the mid-quarter speed is way down. The straightaway speed is way up. So that's a bit of a handful, but the good kind of handful that I think really challenges drivers to push it to the limits. And, my team's working on still maxing out the setup. We're, of course, highly anticipating the final practice session, which hopefully will come up here in the next hour or so or whenever this rain blows out of here, and we can kind of finish dialing in our car. It's had decent speed so far, but maybe not exactly where we want to be. But we've got a little more time to work on it. So we're going to go do just that. Happy, of course, to be starting up front. You always want to earn it on the track during that weekend, but there is some sense of having earned it over the course of a season with points and so forth and the success you've had on track. So, either way, it feels good to be starting up front. Hopefully we can keep it up there all weekend long.
Take some questions for Brad. Raise your hand. We'll start with this young lady right here.
Emily Spink with Popular Speed. Brad, you've won here in the past, of course, on the old track. How do you approach tonight and tomorrow night on the new track? And also, how do you think Penske's been performing as a whole so far this season?
Well, I would say the approach is to take all the Kentucky notes and run them through the shredder and start from scratch because, what's worked here in the past isn't even close to what is going to work here this weekend, and that's been pretty obvious before we got on the track, and then of course kind of a confirmation once we did get on the track. So, I think with this package being similar to Michigan and the repave kind of maybe more closely aligning this track to Michigan, a lot of what we're doing is going off of those notes and what's worked for us there, and so far that's been helpful for us. We had a lot of success with both Penske cars at Michigan. Joey, my teammate, won. I finished 4th, and both of us were, I thought, very, very competitive. So, I think that Team Penske as a whole is as strong as it's ever been. And I think we're in a great position here to have a very strong stretch of races that hopefully we can finish up with in Homestead and get a championship.
Let's go to Jeff Gluck, and then we'll go to front row.
Jeff Gluck from USA Today. Brad, there's been a lot of bad news this week. Every time you turn on the TV, it's been a tough week for the country. You guys are going to go out and provide somewhat of a distraction for people tomorrow night. How conscious are you of your role in sort of that part of the entertainment aspect of everything that goes on here?
Yeah, I think it's a balancing act. You don't want to be, maybe the right term is unworldly and ignore what's going on. Of course, we all want to know what's going on, and I'm as curious as anyone else. But I also understand that a lot of the attraction that our fans have to this sport and any sport is to help them get out of those moments or get out of that mental space. So I think for me I try to balance that with trying to be cognizant on my own, but also understanding that in some ways I am an entertainer as a race car driver, and a lot of the role I think that I serve in the community with what I do is to help brighten people's day and make them smile. So those topics don't really, of course, achieve that. And so there's maybe a fuzzy line, but certainly a balancing act between being conscientious of what's going on, but also conscientious of the position that we have as a sport in society.
Let's go to the front row right here. Go ahead.
Zach Tanzvetti, Fun Stretch. I have 2 questions. I take it you watched the truck race last night, and Daniel Hemrick came once again really close. Looked like he may have gotten it. Were you happy that he raced clean, or were you maybe hoping he was going to push maybe a little bit harder to get that first win?
Yeah, I thought he did a great job. He was right there. Just didn't quite work out for him. But we're just knocking on the door. And, if you knock on the door in this sport, success will come. I think the interesting thing about Daniel is he's one of those guys that I think will be a better cup racer than he is a truck racer, just with his style, his technique, his demeanor, his, enthusiasm and thoughtful approach. And sometimes, we look at the truck series and the Xfinity series and we compare them to maybe the collegiate level sports. And if I was to do that, I would say Daniel's one of those guys that reminds me of like a Tom Brady. He might not have the glorious college numbers or collegiate numbers, but he's the type of guy that has amazing potential at the cup level. And, making moves that he's making and doing the things that he's doing show to me that he's, capable of being an elite level guy at the top of the sport. And sometimes that doesn't always get a lot of highlights or a lot of praise in the second and third tier of this sport. But I see that in him, and I'm, really proud of him.
And describe this part of the season. You go from road courses to plate tracks, now back to the ovals. Is it a part of the circuit that you look forward to, or does the difficulty maybe outweigh the reward for you?
It's a difficult part of the season, but, an enjoyable part. I think some of the difficulty is, like you said, it's a wide variety of tracks, track types, track surfaces, challenges. It's obviously the heat of summer, the hottest part of summer. And so, you look at that, that's another part of the challenge. But I think it's one of our strongest sections, and, that gives me a lot of enthusiasm going into it.
Let's go to Gary Graves, and then we'll go to Tim, and then we'll go to Kent.
Gary Graves, AP. With the talk or the concern about tires, what is your impression right now about the compound that's being used and how it's adapting to the changes?
For the Cup Series?
Yes.
I think the Cup Series is in a great position. The tire change seems to have been not only warranted but very successful. We haven't seen any issues as of now. Of course, that can always change throughout a weekend. But I anticipate it will only get better. One of the key things is this rules package, the less downforce, has been very, very helpful to reducing tire issues because the mid-corner speeds are down. It's interesting going back and forth between the Xfinity car where the mid-corner speed is almost 10 mile an hour higher than the Cup car, and the Xfinity cars are just killing the tires. So from an Xfinity perspective, I would say I'm very nervous about the race tonight and what you're going to see, and would expect a lot of failures of tires. But for the Cup race, I think so far the signs have been very positive.
Let's go to Tim, and then we'll go to Kent.
Two-part question, Brad, right here. If you've shredded your notes or are about to on Kentucky, how long does it take you to develop confidence and a comfort level at a new or repaved track? And the second part, Kevin Harvick was in here earlier and talked about the physical toll of the old track here, the bumps and all that. Did you have that same experience?
Yeah, the racetrack was certainly more physical before with dealing with the bumps, but I didn't think it was terribly, out of line with the expectations I have of myself as a race car driver. Quite honestly, I thought there were some other places that were probably much more challenging, but to each his own. The challenge now is, I think, a little bit more mental because the groove is so narrow on a repaved track that you have to be perfect, and not just perfect by yourself, but perfect in traffic. The first lap of practice here, I went to pass a slower car, and I gave him too much room. I dipped a right side tire just slightly out of the groove, and the car took off, and I lightly brushed the wall. I think that's a perfect example of how mentally demanding a repaved track is, and maybe exchange for physical demand of where it was before. Maybe that's what he was alluding to or what you're alluding to. But I would say that it takes time, of course, to get comfortable with the track. It's a moving target. One of the interesting things about a track once it's been repaved is even just sitting like it has right now for an hour or so with the rain and so forth, the track is going to change dramatically, more so than tracks that have had pavement around for a while. It seems like the oils really seep up, and you go back out there and the track is incredibly slick and you lose all your confidence. Everything you've worked on doesn't work anymore. So there's a constant cycle of confidence where you gain it and lose it, gain it and lose it, and a very taxing mental demand to tracks that have been repaved. Hopefully, this track will see the surface age a bit quicker than what we've seen in a lot of the other repaves. There's been a handful of tracks, I would say maybe Pocono, Homestead, and a few others that I might have left out that have used an aggregate in their asphalt where the track has aged very quickly and has kind of hit a sweet spot to where I think the racing has been phenomenal. And the groove has widened out and the track is predictable. And I think that's been key to seeing those tracks come together. Time will tell if Kentucky will be one of those tracks. So hopefully that'll be the case. And when that happens, we'll build confidence and the racing will get even better.
Let's go back to Kent, then we'll go to Claire B. We've got several here. That'd be good. Go ahead, Brad. You got them going here.
Kent Spencer, WHAS 11. Brett, talk a little bit about, the fact that you have rain today. I thought a lot of people were wondering how many racing grooves there would be on Saturday night. Does the fact that we got a lot of rain today, does that change things for you guys?
Yeah, it definitely will make the groove narrower. It's kind of a shame because I know the track and Goodyear put a lot of work into bringing out the tire monster, whatever that machine is called, to widen out the groove, which I think was certainly a great first step. Unfortunately, the tire that's on the race car this weekend itself isn't really helping by laying down rubber that we would need to keep seeing that grow wider and wider. When the rain comes, it's going to make the groove narrower. It's going to wash out a lot of the work that the track has done a great job of putting in. So it is what it is. We all deal with the same thing, and we'll get through it.
Let's go to Claire B. Then we'll go to Mark, and then Jeff Gluck.
Claire B. Lang, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. I know you and Kevin Harvick have started around each other before, but being the summer and July, I think about the Busch Light Chevrolet and the Miller Lite Ford and the beer wars, right? And the competition that comes with the fans of those two beers, putting it up on there for their driver. How strong are the beer wars now, and how much do you feel like that plays into it a little bit?
Yeah, it's a good question. I've thought about it actually quite a bit over the time I've had the privilege of working with Miller and Miller Coors, and it seems like the beer wars are maybe not as confrontational as they once were, and there tends to be a lot of crossover fans between the two, which I think is great. But I know that our fans really appreciate that those brands are a part of the sport. And it draws a direct lineage, I think, to their lifestyles and to see, those brands in there. And that's kind of, they're fans of our sport and they like what that stands for. And I feel like it's critical to have those brands in there and that they feed off each other. There is always going to be some bit of a rivalry, but it certainly seems to be less contentious maybe than in times past. And there's almost a little bit of camaraderie, I feel, over it, to be quite honest, that there are two cars like that in here. So I think it's a good thing in general.
When you meet him, do you think, I need the Busch?
A little bit. It's not, not the first thing that comes to mind by any stretch of the imagination. What's interesting is, Miller won their first championship in 2012, and Budweiser, I know, has won a handful before. And despite that, there was an era there for at least, probably 15 or 20 years where neither one of them really had a championship. And, I think there was probably a period there where, since there was not that success, that the beer cars started to become maybe not thought of as a performance car to drive. And now we're seeing that change again, which I think is kind of cool.
We'll go to Mark Story, Jeff Gluck, and finish with David Scott.
Hey Brad, Mark Story, Lexington Herald Leader. Because the 2 and the 18 cars have been so good here, when you came here on the old track, throughout practice, were you always, check in, see where, how fast he was, and is all that out now, or are you still doing that little bit of that?
Yeah, Kyle's good, at a lot of tracks, and he deserves the credit and acknowledgement, I think, here as well as most every other racetrack. So, I think I make it a point not to focus on one car at any racetrack. There's 40 cars in the field nowadays, and if you focus on beating one, you're probably going to finish 39th. And I would much rather finish first and focus on beating all of them. But certainly there is some due respect that Kyle deserves for his success, really here and all other tracks.
We'll go to Jeff Gluck and finish with David Scott.
I got a question out of pure curiosity. So last week on the last restart there, the track was like covered in speedy dry, it looked like. I mean, it looked like you guys were driving through snow almost or something.
Yeah.
And, you guys at that point there's nobody lifting whatsoever. Do you still have the same amount of grip when you go through a speedy dry patch like that? I mean, does the sensation in the car change at all?
Yeah, driving through speedy dry on those situations is never fun. Of course, we'd like to see it be cleaned all the way up. There's a balancing act of consideration to, running 15 minutes of yellow flag to get the track perfect versus, getting to green as quickly as possible and the track not being to its, fullest form. I think when it comes to speedway tracks, the cars tend to have more grip than other tracks and more capability. So there seems to be, I think, a lower threshold of what's acceptable in terms of the track being ready to go, and that's why you see those clouds at those types of tracks, in those situations at those type of tracks. But certainly it's not 100% what you would want to drive through, and the grip's not 100% there, but it's tolerable for me.
Final question, far left, David Scott.
David Scott from the Charlotte Observer. Can you see through all that speedy dry?
No, that's part of the challenge, right?
Okay. Another young guy's question. There are two rookies who look right now like they might be in the chase. How would you assess what Chase and Ryan Blaney have done this year?
Well, I think both of them are doing a great job. I look at the 24 car, and they've got great speed. Chase has done a great job. It seems like as rookies, a lot of times you get caught up in a lot of wrecks trying to find the limits. And I think Chase has done a great job of being competitive and being smart to run, a 500 or 400-mile race and be there at the end. So he deserves a lot of credit. Of course, that car is really fast. It's been one of the fastest cars here this year, and there's something to be said for that as well. And I look at my teammate Ryan Blaney, and he's doing exactly what he needs to do. He's right at the edge of being in the chase. Of course, we'd like to see him get a win, and that will come, I'm sure, sooner than later. But I look at him, and he's just running smart races. He's with the Wood brothers, who, of course, have the alliance with Penske, but they're still the Wood brothers, and they still only have one car, and there's some limitations that come with that. So a lot of respect for what Ryan's doing for that group, and he's really carried them to, I think, a whole nother level in terms of being a consistent competitor to have quality finishes, quality runs.
Brad, certainly thank you for coming in, taking your time out this afternoon, and good luck this weekend.
Thank you, Commander. Was this your last time? Was this my last time talking to you on this
It's up
stage?
to you. If you win, it won't be.
Okay.
It's all in your court,
I
buddy.
want an encore, so we'll finish off with that
All right.
after Victor Lane
It's all-
on
it's all
Saturday.
up
How
to
about
you,
that?
Brad. It's
Okay.
all up to you.
Thanks for your work here, Commander. If I
Thank
don't
you.
see you, I
Thank
plan
you.
on seeing you.
I hope so.
Okay.
Thanks.
Have a good one.